We are live. Welcome, everybody. I'm back with another Infinite Layers, and I'm back with the Predicate team, as well as some friends from Uniswap and Paxos as well. There's been a lot of action happening in the last month or so with institutional adoption really, really ramping up in the Ethereum ecosystem specifically, but really just in crypto as a whole. So today we're going to be talking about that a little bit and how different protocols and primitives enable that and just make that more frictionless and more, I would say, trusted, where these institutional teams, they might be, a little wary to do certain things, and how can we kind of make that easier? So before we dive into the discussion, I'm going to go ahead and let everyone do a round of introductions. I'll start with Devin, and then we can go to Leslie and then Nikhil.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Devin Walsh. I'm the executive director and co-founder of the Uniswap Foundation. We are a grant-making nonprofit which focuses on supporting the growth and governance of the Uniswap protocol.
And I'm Leslie Chavkin. I'm the global head of policy at Paxos. I'm really thrilled to be here with Devin and Nikhil. If you're not familiar with Paxos, we are the leading regulated blockchain and tokenization infrastructure platform, and you may know us as a stablecoin issuer. We have a number of US dollar stablecoin products.
And then, I'm Nikhil, co-founder and CEO of Predicate. Thanks, Nader, for organizing this. Predicate builds policy infrastructure. So we enable on-chain financial applications and the developers and organizations of those on-chain financial applications to build and enforce programmatic rules for what transactions can go into and out of their systems.
Amazing. That's great intros. We have some really, really high caliber people here with some really interesting topics to touch on. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. So I think one of the things that is a very good parallel between what people in the traditional finance world are used to versus what crypto brings, or just the idea of an exchange. And we have, in the crypto world, we have DEXs or decentralized exchanges, and then we have our traditional exchanges that are kind of more centralized. And it's a good topic of discussion because it's an idea and a primitive that people on both sides understand, but maybe they don't understand kind of the trade-offs between the two. So so I guess we'll kick it off with the question of what do decentralized exchanges bring to institutions, and why should they care?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick things off. I think a lot of the technological benefits of blockchain infrastructure and protocols that I think a lot of developers, recognize pretty immediately can also be applied many ways to market structure and markets. So having things like 24/7 uptime, 24/7 markets. I know, I feel like I see tweets all the time, and everyone listening to this probably does too, of people going to trade, people in crypto going to trade stocks on the weekend and being unpleasantly reminded that Wall Street, like New York Stock Exchange, closes on the weekends because crypto markets are open 24/7. So things like 24/7 uptime, but also things like transparent, fair pricing of assets. If you trade on Uniswap, let's maybe abstract away thinking about MEV supply chain right now, looking just on the DEX level. You understand exactly how the price you are getting for the asset you are trading is being generated. Instant settlement, not having to wait 1, 2, 3 days for a number of opaque organizations behind the scenes to confirm that you in fact have bought an asset at some price before you can actually have those assets in custody. Those are things that I think we get a lot of those ideas from or those characteristics from blockchain technology, specifically in DEXs, and I think institutions also recognize those benefits as well.
Yeah, and on top of that, I'd also add just elimination of counterparty risk, since you're not relying on a centralized entity, and I think that's really important, a huge value.
So have you seen, if you kind of just bring up this topic and someone is completely unfamiliar with DEX, just out of curiosity, how do they typically feel about this whole idea and the value proposition? Does it kind of resonate with them pretty quickly, or is it something that they actually have to maybe have more context around or even usage of before it really clicks? People.
Yeah, that's a good question. You see responses that run the gamut, and it's definitely changed over the course of the last few years as well. I think due to the maybe public views which have been, distributed by the media about crypto, there's some initial and potentially like fair skepticism. A lot of the exchanges that people like working on Wall Street have heard of, like FTX, for instance, and so we may not have like the best reputation off the bat before we get into the details and in how a lot of this like infrastructure works. But I think that like over the past few years, you've seen kind of like growing recognition of the potential and opportunity, if not the opportunity today in some cases. I think today we'll talk a little bit about some of the obstacles as it relates to compliance, but to be honest, like depth of liquidity for some of these like massive institutions is also like one of the blockers to like onboarding for some of these institutions, which are trading, hundreds of, like billions of dollars per day, that, we may not be at the scale to kind of like onboard them yet. So, but there is kind of like growing recognition of the potential and upside of some of the, characteristics of the technology I just mentioned.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit to that as well. The other part from an institution is you have users, right? At the end of the day, they're looking for more customers. And so if you have customers who are transacting on chain, they hold ETH, they hold USDC, they hold, USDG, any of these assets. The question is how can I get access to this customer base 24/7, right? And so for them, that's really the question of how can a DEX enable that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting also sometimes when you have people like us who are deeply down this rabbit hole of a thing that we work on as our career, and something that has been evolving literally, I guess at this point, like 10 years from idea to implementation to improvements, and now like where we are today. And it's something that has kind of like, I would say, made us so compelled about this idea that we decided to work on it full time, and how fast we and some of us like fall in love with some of this stuff versus some of the more like institutional or traditional world where they hear about it and it's kind of like it takes a long time, and now we're starting to see more like actual like adoption and interest in it. But it's just interesting how long it's taken for a lot of this stuff to happen. And when I joined, I thought it would happen much faster, but it's starting to happen. So that's a cool thing for sure. So to the next question, I guess, along a similar line of that, for some of these traditional institutions to maybe come on chain, what are maybe some of the main challenges that they're running into?
I can jump in. I think some thoughts for me. One, I think there's some cultural barriers just for these institutions. They're larger bureaucracies. They're not necessarily antagonistic, but it takes much longer to adopt a new technology and integrate it into systems. Secondly, I think there are some technological impediments, right? They don't always have kind of the deep crypto native expertise in-house that you could find in the industry itself. But most importantly, I think it's barriers around regulatory and compliance hurdles, right? Because you have big institutions that are well regulated. They're very interested in going into this open, permissionless environment, but that can be scary for their regulators, right? So how do they get involved in open, permissionless activity while providing comfort to their regulators that they're upholding all of their obligations around anti-money laundering, around countering the financing of terrorism? So I think that has been sort of one blocker for institutions. I will say on the upside, at least in the US, it was a pretty constraining environment for institutions to get involved in digital assets up until recently. A lot of the guidance from banking regulators is changing. So I think we will see a lot more activity and institutions wanting to go in, but this question around regulatory obligations remains.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I think it's the recognition of the opportunity is I think here or getting there. And now you do have individuals at a lot of these, like banks, hedge funds, other kinds of funds, like asset issuers who are focused on real world assets who recognize what is so exciting about DEXs. But now it's kind of the overcoming the challenge of like bridging the gap between the trad world and like off-chain like compliance requirements, things like geofencing, things like AML, KYC, things like OFAC compliance, and figuring out, you know, one of the benefits of DEX is you get it's permissionless and anyone can use it. But on the flip side, like one of the obstacles to overcome is the fact that anyone can use it, and there are like rules around, you know, interacting with some of those folks.
Yeah, and I think adding to the last part there is just from an institution standpoint, like there is a lot of tech that's been built over the last, you know, 6 months, even if not counting for the last few years. And so understanding how to navigate all those different pieces, right? So, you know, for example, we might talk about Uniswap v4 and hooks, but what exactly does that mean? Like they're familiar with, you know, a decentralized exchange, and they might be thinking about it from a Uniswap v2 perspective, maybe a v3, but then you're talking about hooks. And so what does that mean? Same on interoperability as well, right? I think we still can be tied to how we think of historically for interoperability. Don't even go into the topic of intents, which then like completely starts confusing people. So I think there is this part of what all have we built, and then how actually do you articulate that? Is it something that we're able to say, here's how you've normally been operating, here's how you can apply that similar thinking here, or are you having to kind of do an entire ground up view of no, wait, just start from zero?
Yeah, there's such a massive spectrum of complexity versus, you know, what we like to talk about versus what people actually will be drawn and compelled to. Like the ideas that we often talk about are, you know, technical details and implementation details that enable things, but we often don't talk enough about the, you know, why as opposed to the what. But touching on Uniswap v2, v3, v4, yeah, can we just touch on quickly what Uniswap v4 is and how it differs from maybe previous versions of Uniswap?
Great question. So Uniswap v4 is the most recent upgrade to the Uniswap protocol. It was released earlier this year, I think end of January. So it's been out for around 6 months at this point. And there are many innovations that came with v4. The key one, though, is this idea of hooks. So hooks you can think of as, you know, is the opportunity for any developer to come in and add customizations to a given liquidity pool. The prompt or the motivation for adding this ability to customize your liquidity pool came from Hayden and his, you know, Hayden, the founder and creator of Uniswap, reflecting on the fact that in V2 and V3, they had to make so many design trade-offs and design decisions and how to design their decks, what kind of oracle to integrate, what kind of curve to use, when are fees taken, and kind of taking a step back, reflecting upon that and thinking, you know, why do we have to make these design decisions? Like, can we build baseline infrastructure and then, you know, potentially like open up the ability for any developer to actually come in and potentially network effects and leverage, you know, the network effects of building and leverage kind of the safety and security that is endowed in this protocol, which has been like audited, used for many months, but then introduce a custom curve for specific kinds of assets, introduce, you know, geofencing or like OFAC checks for users, introduce fees upon withdrawal of liquidity positions, like add customizations for a given use case. And I think one of the exciting things is that this release has coincided not only with kind of a new wave of DeFi innovators who now have a much lower barrier to entry in you know, having their creation, their innovation come to life, but we're also seeing, you know, so many institutions wanting to come on chain. These institutions have a large set of requirements that they need to fulfill, and we now have, you know, this playground that we can use to develop code to actually fulfill those requirements and allow again, like bridge the gap between TradFi and DeFi.
Very, very helpful, and I didn't know a lot of that actually, but it makes a lot of sense.
Great.
And it is good timing.
Yeah.
You know, it's cool to see like crypto companies and builders building for the future that they see, and then often have their vision collide with reality when things like this kind of happen, which is really cool to see.
Yeah.
So following up with the discussion around, I would say, Paxos and institutional adoption, specifically with Paxos, Can you tell us a little bit about USDL?
Yeah.
Just
So
anything you want to share about it?
Yeah, so USDL or Lift Dollar is a yield-bearing US dollar stablecoin. It's issued by Paxos International, which is our affiliate in Abu Dhabi. It's regulated under the Financial Services Regulatory Authority in the Abu Dhabi global market. And I should say right up front, Lift Dollar is not available in the United States and a number of other jurisdictions. We take that really seriously, but it's a great case study for this predicate tooling. So USDL, like I mentioned, it's a yield-bearing stablecoin. It delivers yield to holders programmatically every day via a rebasing function. And sort of the thinking behind Lift Dollar is that when Paxos International, our affiliate, looked at sort of demand for stable coins around the world, they saw specifically a lot of demand in countries in Latin America where there was very high inflation of the local currency. So there was this real push into holding digital dollars, but there wasn't this opportunity to earn yield on top of it. So there was sort of a natural use case for yield-bearing stablecoins. And since then, we've also seen that there's been a lot of interest from businesses in those regions for using Lift Dollar for treasury management. So that's kind of the big picture on Lift Dollar. But when you think about a product like that in this DeFi space, there were a couple of challenges that the team had to think through. One was on the technical side, which is that Uniswap v3 and v4 don't natively support the rebasing function that we use to deliver the yield. And then the second issue was much more to that regulatory point that I mentioned earlier. The question is, all right, so you have this product in this permissionless environment. What do you do about ensuring that it's not going to places where the security laws don't allow it? How do you make sure you're geofencing areas that are prohibited jurisdictions? And how do you prevent it to going to folks that are on any kind of sanctions list? So those are the questions that we had to think about when introducing it to this landscape.
Interesting. Yeah, when you kind of move from the world of crypto where everything is permissionless and anyone can do everything, and you kind of often don't take into consideration the complexity of international law and how to really make all this stuff interop with each other. It's wild when you start looking and learning more about how each country operates and why a lot of these old systems are in place, simply because it's too hard to kind of break them out. And I think that's where crypto shines, is the interoperability piece. But when you start introducing all the regulations, I think that's where predicate might come in. Actually.
And really helping to navigate the nuance and the complexity using the technology.
So for Nikhil, then, can we touch on how, I guess, predicate's hook infrastructure works and how it kind of like enables institutions to maybe interop with a lot of these DeFi primitives with the different rules and regulations and stuff in place?
Yeah, for sure. So as Leslie mentioned, there's kind of two hook components here. One of them is a rebasing hook. We won't need to go into as much detail on that one. But then there's the other one, which uses a predicate infrastructure. So essentially what an asset issuer like a Paxos can do is when they're deploying a hook, they can set programmatic rules for who can swap or who can LP into these into a liquidity pool, in which an organization like Paxos is one of the primary liquidity providers. So basically, in this case, you are allowing users to be able to go and get liquidity from a hook. Now, what you're doing here crucially, right, is you're setting, in this case, like specific anti-money laundering requirements, geolocation if needed, any other types of programmatic rules. It can be KYC based as well. Really, our view is that it varies asset by asset, right? Some things, let's say if it's a money market fund or a tokenized security, you might need to put a KYC behind it. You might require KYC. But for some of these things, you don't necessarily need that. So it really just depends on the asset. But the whole point is that there is someone at the end of the day who's servicing that liquidity and the ability to go and get that asset. Then once it hits a blockchain, then it can be fully permissionless, right? And so again, then you have asset-based requirements. But really for the predicate hook infrastructure with Uniswap, it's that you have different organizations that are like, hey, we need to enable our product, our tokenized product, to be able to be accessible in a 24/7 market capacity. And the best way to do that is a decentralized exchange, because that has it's fully on chain, it's fully composable, and now you're able to enable the programmatic rules you need to from a regulation and a legal standpoint, as well as kind of a reputation standpoint. So that's how you really basically do all of this. But it's all about how do you enable that within a programmable system itself.
And I guess the question that I always have when I start hearing about this is kind of, I'm a developer and I want to actually build and implement something like this. There's EVM and there's SVM, and then each individual virtual machine has all these different implementations. So what networks is Predicate supported on, and where do you see people building, and where are you thinking to build in the future as well?
Yeah, so we support all EVM chains now. That's newer since the last time I think we spoke, Nader. So yeah, we're on all EVM chains. The main ones that we're getting the most activity are on Ethereum and on Plume. We do have some upcoming use cases that are happening on Base and Arbitrum. In the future, we are looking at your non-EVM chain. So I think the first non-EVM chain we'll natively support will likely be Solana, because there are a few projects who basically need Predicate in order to be able to deploy. But given the way we've designed Predicate, it really functions and operates on any smart contract enabled blockchain. And then I guess related to that too is we now have we've been updating our documentation so developers can go and start taking a look at how to implement it. Even the Uniswap v4 hook infrastructure, it's in our white paper. That's a publicly available repo. So anyone can go and take a look at it and basically try that out as well. And then the last part is that we also have our front end dashboarding and tooling as well. So for a developer, they can go and create their entire system, generate API keys as needed, add other folks from their team as needed to be able to have access into the overall system that they're building.
And that's available now, like a permissionless dashboard at the moment, or do you?
It's not a permissionless dashboard, because if you're generating API keys, we actually need to verify who's getting it, because otherwise if you're giving away an API key for free, there's implications on your backend infrastructure. So in that case, they just reach out to us and we can provide basically access into that. But if you go into our docs, they can basically actually get directly added to a Slack group with our engineering team to be able to access it. It's really just a question of how do you manage API keys.
Got it. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the regulations that are being passed in the United States, Genius Act specifically. So I started seeing a lot of mention of this when it first was proposed, and I didn't really look into it, to be honest. I just kind of was watching what other people were talking about it. It seemed like a bullish or an exciting thing for us as an industry, and it passed, and everyone was like really excited about it. And then I went to go look at it, and for some reason I was in my head thinking it was going to be this regulation that like incentivized or supported crypto, but in reality, it's actually just a set of regulation around how stable coins, from what I understand, can be issued and managed and things like that, which I guess is actually a good thing, because I think a lot of the challenge that companies in the United States have been around the lack of clear regulation to follow. So they do stuff and they end up hiring all these lawyers trying to go around these really old rules. But now we have clear rules, I think, to kind of explain, how to go about doing things. So I would love to know maybe what are some of the considerations now that we have the Genius Act that stablecoin issuers should be considering, and also how like Uniswap v4 might fit into all this?
Yeah, I think for those of us that have been in the stablecoin issuance space, the fact that we now finally have legislation at the federal level for stablecoins is huge. And you're right, it's kind of it's just sort of a starting point, right? It's only one part of the industry. It's just issuance. There's still a lot more to do in terms of providing regulatory clarity through an eventual piece of market structure legislation. But I think the fact that we have the Genius Act is huge in sending a signal to enterprise players and to retail holders that this is a safe space to be in. It's trustworthy. This is how we can modernize financial architecture. So from that perspective, I think it's a really big development. We're really excited about it. In terms of what the act kind of means for all of us, it does create a very high standard around anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism for issuers, right? And whether you're a non-bank or a bank, you have to uphold the same standards. And, speaking from the Paxos perspective, we've been a regulated institution since 2015. So we're already upholding those types of obligations. But I think for a lot of issuers who are yet to get prudential regulation, this is going to be kind of an uphill climb, right? They're going to have to get used to this and meet pretty stringent requirements. And so I think this is where we go with the conversation around tooling. How do you meet those obligations, and how do you make it so that you can stay innovative and be in this space while maintaining the obligations that you have to around compliance and regulatory needs?
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Leslie just mentioned from the perspective of while Nader, to your point, looking at the legislation, it may just seem like very simple to a lot of folks. Like, this is how a stable coin works. Why do we need this in a bill? I think to the point Leslie was making, and Nader, you got to like that is really what's required to bring some of the bigger institutions into the space. I think being at Uniswap, the foundation the last few years, seeing up close and personal the implications of a lack of regulatory clarity and what that means for it, even an organization that's more on the risk-taking side than some of these the traditional organizations, the obstacles that stand in the way from just moving forward and doing something that seems relatively simple are very high without clear rules of the road defining when what you're doing is legal versus not, when you might get in trouble versus when you're kind of in the clear. And so I think especially for asset issuers like Circle, Paxos, like others, it's good for them, which is good for Uniswap as a market for those assets.
Yeah, and then to the point around tooling, it's going to be a question of not only the tooling that might be needed now, but it's also you are at the end of the day building on a new technology stack. And so in that case, there are new things that you have to consider, and just how do you enable that within your technology stack itself? How does that fit into your existing systems? We have DEX components, but then it's also, there's a lot of questions around, if you are a stablecoin issuer, how do you think about the transfer rules for your assets? Those are things that will have to get further defined. And so while you do have the Genius Act that was passed, it basically feeds into a number of different work streams that you then have to better define across a lot of these different facets. So I think of it as kind of the foundations upon which you then are doing a lot of additional work.
Yeah. So now that we have the foundation, and rules to go by, it's going to be really interesting to see over the next couple of years, because we've all been working, here in the United States and really in a lot of places around the world, in a very uncertain environment. And to even start a company in the United States in crypto, it's before all of this passed, to be honest, it's kind of crazy, right? Because no one knows if what you're doing is legally under some umbrella or not, right? And while most of the people that we choose to work with are working with good intentions, sometimes there's still SEC stuff involved where there's no clarity, and you have to go through all that, and hopefully now that a lot less of that's going to happen, it's going to really, really ignite a lot of innovation, and we're seeing it obviously, but it's going to be exciting now that we're all here and working here. And I think a lot of the stuff that you all are doing is going to be kind of at the core of all this. I think obviously, everything that we've talked about here will be part of the future. But I guess in terms of the technical implementation, that's kind of a lot of the more detailed stuff that we work on in our day-to-day work, I guess. So I guess speaking to that future, what is Predicate's capabilities with this? So Predicate enables these custom, rules. Uniswap enables, with V4, you already have kind of a more broad set of features, but with hooks, you're also able to enable custom stuff, right? So how does Predicate and hooks maybe fit in for some of the future stuff that's coming, and for developers that want to maybe build interesting, unique products that kind of facilitate some of this stuff? What does it look like for them?
Yeah, so for us, I think it is, first up would be the regulated rails, right, for assets. So stable coins and even more tokenized securities types of assets. So we can actually power a full end for a developer or an organization. We could power the entire end-to-end system for a tokenized securities marketplace. which is quite powerful. You can enable all these types of customization on Uniswap, especially because each type of asset pool would likely have different requirements than others. Not only on AML CFT, but you have to also think about it from a market integrity standpoint of like, what is the amount of assets that can be bought at any given point in time? What are the markets for where one could buy different assets and where can they flow to? That starts fitting into an intent-based system as well, if native, how you can imagine it. So in this case, you really are able to build the end-to-end regulated rails through something like Predicate, which is really how we're envisioning it. But then for even other types of use cases, I think like I've always been really interested in privacy. And I still think there's a really, really important space for how Uniswap v4 can be paired with privacy. And so for those kinds of things as well, Predicate functions really well for that, because you still need to think about the rules for who can swap or LP into a privacy pool, because otherwise you end up creating a mixer, which we know has its own challenges from a legal as well as like a regulation standpoint. So this is where Predicate fits really well for v4. And that's the cool part about v4 is just the full extent of composability and customizability that you can do, and how that can be paired with other types of DeFi primitives. I'll let Devin chime in as well, because I'm sure she has lots of thoughts on other things.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it really well, Nikhil. I mean, I think to your point, like beginning to overcome from an asset issuance perspective, like some of the barriers to actually create liquidity pools on chain that will allow for broader permissionless distribution of the assets, I think will unlock kind of like the next order of change that we'll see. And I think one instance that I've pointed out to my team a few times that I think is really exciting is looking at the Morpho Coinbase integration that kind of shows like the demand for like lending, I guess like Bitcoin backed lending on Morpho, which is like leveraging Coinbase as a distribution channel, but it's just showing kind of like more of the more like trad world or like retail world demand for DeFi products. And I think like as we begin to overcome some of the barriers that exist, whether from like a regulatory perspective, legal perspective, but also from like a UX and like distribution perspective, I think what we'll see is actually like unlocking a lot of value creation for users and consumers, which is very exciting. Like in the case of the like Morpho Bitcoin example, it's the ability to access like loans off of your Bitcoin, which maybe like a typical user wouldn't be able to access before. I'm excited, to be honest, for a world in which yield-bearing stablecoins are allowed in the US and are permitted in the US. I think there's a lot of upside for consumers from using those kinds of products, but maybe that's for a future day that Leslie can maybe comment on a bit more. But I think you have to go step at a time, and we're seeing some really big steps be made today.
Well, this has been an awesome discussion. So let's wrap it up with a rapid fire set of questions, or a set of 2 questions for each person here. What are you most excited about in the stablecoin index space over the next year? Or I guess just one question each.
Yeah, I guess I can go first. I'm excited to excited to see users on board and begin to trade USDL with this new hook. I'm also excited to begin to explore other institutional users of this hook. So I know Nikhil has been talking to some other institutions who are interested in leveraging this hook or different spins on this hook to onboard new kinds of assets, and I think it will be really exciting to see those come on chain.
And I'm with Devin. I think what I'm most excited about is that for so long, it's felt like crypto was its own siloed universe in competition with some of these institutions. And now, especially since we have stablecoin legislation in the US, you start to see that there's a lot more opportunity for partnership. They're really eager to get into this space. They don't always have the knowledge and the know-how. So I think there's tons of opportunity for partnership with crypto natives. So I'm really excited to see where that goes over the next 6 to 12 months.
And on my end, I think it's going to be related to that, but that interoperability, right, between commodities and unregulated markets with regulated markets, and the fact that it shouldn't be so much that you're fully siloing one to another. Like in the past, I think we've thought about everything having to be, like fully permission chains and everything having to sit there if it's a regulated type of activity, versus then you have everything else on, Ethereum and Solana and your L2s. But I'm excited by how you can actually enable a lot of this on your permissionless chains itself, which really creates a more interoperable and composable system. That's something we haven't done yet, and I think that's where we're going towards.
All right, incredible. This has been a really interesting conversation. I think that it's a timely conversation also with everything that's happening, and I've learned a lot. So thank you for your time today. And for anyone looking to maybe learn more about any of the topics here, we've tagged everyone. With Paxos, though, like what is the best place for them to learn more about Paxos?
Oh, they can go to paxos.com. We have tons of information, tons of materials.
Simple enough. Paxos.com. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next week on the next Infinite Layers.
Thanks, everyone.